If people are still joining, let's definitely wait a couple of minutes. Okay, so it's 3 past already. We can start this meeting. So welcome everyone to this interim meeting for the core working group. I am Marco Tiloca, my co-chair is Jaime Jimenez. And this is an official IETF meeting. So we are recording now, the not well applies. Please get familiar with it if you're not already. It's not just about IPR, it's also about code of conduct. So please be nice with each other. And the agenda for today is mostly on status and progress checking on a number of working group documents. We'll go through SenML data CT, now under ISG review with a few comments to address, and we have a presentation from Karsten about that. A few announcements mostly on 2 core-conf documents, Young Cibor and SID. Then we go through Coral, and Christian will give an overview, especially on the ongoing work on the information model, and then conditional attributes from Bill. And then we can spend some time to get back on the possible charter update based on the proposed text we have for it. Does anyone have any bashing proposal for the agenda?
Sorry, did you mention echo request tag?
Thank you. Yes, that's one more thing we can check as a first thing. And right after, I think it's probably better to take the core-conf point before SenML data CT, because it's supposed to be pretty quick, I believe, for today. Okay, yeah, then we can start with the first new point, mostly for Christian, I think, if there's any news on the status on echo request tag.
It's basically mostly responding to Ben's points that needs to be done by me. Göran has already taken a few steps there, and I've just come out of a situation of too much work, so I think I can respond to those soon. Should only need just another update. There is nothing major in there anymore. It's just a few nits, and I think then we can progress with that.
Yeah, I reminded Roman, but he hasn't replied yet. Is that correct?
No, I haven't heard any act from him either.
Okay, I'll give it another try, and then if he doesn't answer, we can move forward when you've answered Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, the next point is about the two core cons documents, Young, Sieber, and Seed. They're also under SG review with some comments to address. It's mostly about a few announcements on them. So Michael Richardson opened a number of issues in the working group repository to track especially those comments to address and make it a bit more systematic, the work on addressing them. And then we also took a step forward to accelerate the work more. And after some discussion, we agreed to set up a design team to work on those issues and those comments. And we are going to have a first meeting for that. So it's mostly the authors and Michael for the first meeting. And it's going to be most likely recurring. And the precise schedule will be probably nailed down tomorrow during the first meeting. So this should hopefully help advancing the documents faster. Anything you want to add on this, Karsten? Because I don't see Michael. I see Michael. Karsten, Michael, do you want to add anything already today?
Well, I still have to actually read through all the stuff. So this is kind of top of my agenda now. So I think tomorrow I will have tomorrow in the design team meeting, I will have an overview of what we need to do. And of course, we can also in parallel do simple stuff like fix editorial comments and so on. So this should go in parallel, but if we have larger technical issues, we probably need to discuss them first before coming up with pull requests. And I think the biggest technical issue that came up so far is whether we actually even should leave string-based identifiers in the Yang-Sieber document. And that is obviously a pretty big change if we want to change anything there. And I think it should be well known why we put them in there. But there's also the observation that this has much more deep interactions with the Yang ecosystem, because those identifiers need to work with all weird Yang features. On the other hand, they already exist in Yang JSON, so it shouldn't be too hard to get them right. So we have to examine what the comments were that we got and whether we can solve them by just recurring to RFC 17951, which did not exist at the time when we did this work, or whether we are getting into seriously difficult territory. And in that case, I would be prepared to discuss this some more.
And I would say that it's also enough for us to specify that numbers and strings would never appear in the same document, I guess is the right term.
Well, never say never. I think that there's space for all three cases. So the case you don't have SIDS because you are a big WEM and web rack-mounted system, and you have 4 fans blowing at your CPU. So you can do everything with strings. There is clearly a case where you want to do everything with SID, which is the constraint case and the one we mostly care about. And the reality is that you probably want to mix that for certain applications, but these are also the applications with the many fans. So I think it should be clear that the constrained case is the one where we use SIDs only. Right now, we only have two media type parameters, ID equals SID and ID equals I forget. And we may want to look at that again. So how do we describe the mixed situation? And maybe we can just leave out the parameter. Do we need content format numbers for these and so on?
Thank you. And thanks a lot, Michael, again, for opening the issues and offering to help out. We'll continue with the details tomorrow at the design team meeting then. Okay, then I think, Karsten, the floor is yours now for SenML data CT, and the slides are loaded, so that's right. Okay.
It's too easy to switch off your microphone while selecting slides. Okay, so I made a few slides based on the ISG comments we got on the SenML data CT document. There are lots of comments that just can be done by the authors, so I'm not going to discuss these, but there are a few that maybe are noteworthy. The first question was, does DataCT actually needs numbers and the full spec with the media type name parameters and content coding? I think we have discussed this in the working group, we have a compact form, we have a general form, and there's no way we can limit ourselves to just one of them. So I think we can answer this with no change needed. Second item, Ben pointed out that content coding's nest. I completely forgot about that, probably because we have never had a use case where we would actually use that. So the current syntax for a content format spec only allows one content coding, and worse, the registry for content format numbers only allows one content coding. So that's maybe a separate item we can keep in the backs of our minds. That content format numbers cannot cover that case. But fortunately, due to the previous slide, we still can talk about these cases. And so where we currently say something like application/JSONs at deflate to provide a single content coding, we could provide multiple ones using some syntax we could come up with. So we could say something like at deflate, comma, AS128 GCM, or we could use the @ sign again. I have a slight preference to the second syntax because it can be run in a simple while loop, and so you need much less code than you need for the previous one. It looks a little bit less like HTTP, but I think we can live with that. The example I used here is one where we have one content coding that actually does compression, the deflate content coding, which is widely used, and another content coding which actually does encryption. Now, this is a weird thing. We are very unlikely to ever see this in a SenML file, but it's the only reasonable example for more than one content coding I could come up with based on the content codings that are currently registered. So I expect to use that example in the draft as well. So that's one way of doing it. And unless people think the comma stuff is better than the double @ sign, I think we should go there. The other approach, of course, would be to say we don't do nested content codings in COAP, obviously, because there's only one item for content coding in the registry. So we don't need to do it in SenML either, and we won't handle nested content codings at all. So I think that's a valid position to take, but of course it removes some flexibility that the HTTP world has, and creates another place where we have an artificial restriction that we don't really need. So my proposal would be to go for add coding, 0 more add coding suffixes, and the order, of course, is important, that we would provide for. Ari.
Okay, hopefully now my microphone works.
Yes.
Good. I think it makes sense for us to have the flexibility, so I would actually do it even if co-op cannot do it. But the question would be, between those two options, how is it that HTTP does it? Is there comma, space, different headers, or?
Well, in HTTP, it's a header field, and HTTP has a specific way to handle repeatable header fields. And if a header field can be repeated, that can be pulled together into a single header field with a comma separator.
Okay.
So if we want to emulate the HTTP syntax as much as possible, yeah, we essentially would do one of the two, because HTTP can do both.
Okay, because I mean, the main use case I have right now for this is that I'm actually putting the headers directly to HTTP headers. I mean, with of course the split the at away. So there, I would have a minor preference of doing whatever is easy to slap on an HTTP header, but maybe it's not a big difference.
Well, you in the second example here, you would split on the add and use the leftmost for the content type and the other one for the, you would join the other one again for a content coding, or you would make separate content coding headers. And in the first one, you would still split on the add, but just put whatever you find into your content coding header. So I don't think there's a lot of coding difference.
Yeah, more like 2 lines of code.
Yeah. And of course, when you go the other direction from HTTP to SenML, you already have to collect all the content coding headers. So you get one array-shaped header field that you then turn into whatever syntax we come up with.
Other than us not having any use cases, or possibly nobody having any, is there anything that would stop us from redefining the co-op content format registry to say that that can be a list and everyone currently so far only input nothing or a single item in there, so it's a single item list for those?
No, I think we could do that, but probably not in this document.
No, and probably ideally not until we have a concrete use case that is not as contrived as what we have now, because we don't have any.
Okay, so with that, let me move to the next item. So Ben Kedder caught us trying to define ABNF rules in a way that actually makes sense and is not sucking up all the legacy of the last 30 years. And of course, the question is, can we do that? So is there maybe something magic about ABNF rule names that makes people assume that using the same rule name in different documents still has the same semantics. I think mostly I do, if I see the word digit in uppercase in an ABNF spec, I do expect that's the one from 5234 and not something different. But on the other hand, of course, the ones that actually have the idiosyncrasies of various syntaxes, nobody expects them to be the same. So if you have a production token in your ABNF, you expect that to be different from any other token you have in any other RFC. And actually, I also noticed that when he pointed out there is a new version of HTTP coming out, a new revision, excuse me, not a new version. The version is still going to be 1.1. That has a slightly different ABNF rule for parameters. So there used to be a need to have a parameter after every semicolon, and now you can have semicolons without parameter values behind them. I have no idea why. It's mentioned in the changes, so it obviously was a deliberate change, but I would expect that's another one of those legacy things, because there's no point in doing that. So yeah, the HTTP people are doing it themselves, so why wouldn't we be doing it? And the third observation is that HTTP uses an extended form of ABNF with the pound sign or hash sign meaning something different. We wouldn't use that syntax in any case, because we would use basic ABNF. So I think the congruence, the need for congruence here is limited, but it sure makes sense to actually point that out. There probably should be some text explaining. Do I have a slide for that? No. There should be some text explaining how these are differing, and the OWS that you see in the copy from 7230, the O is obsolete because it's the obsolete form of whitespace, and we don't need obsolete whitespace. So in our syntax, there is a star SP there. Yeah, so I would propose to handle this as an editorial request to explain what we have been doing, but not to actually change anything in how we're doing it. Okay, so then there were several comments about error handling. So Ben put up a specific issue that probably is the most interesting one, where you have content format in a SenML pack that actually is registered, the content format number that is registered, but that a specific implementation doesn't know about. So that's certainly something that is going to happen when you have numeric content format numbers. Roman put a more general question: what happens if this thing is simply malformed? So it's not between 0 and 2 to the 16, or it's not registered, and so on. And Christa also pointed out that the sender of a CT doesn't know whether the receiver will be able to interpret the associated value correctly or not. Yeah, that's kind of what you get with a registered type system. So I'm wondering what amount of verbiage we need here. So generally we have taken the position that in SenML it's the responsibility of the SenML generator to provide valid and processable SenML. And we do have various registry-based items in SenML, for instance, the units registry, So we already have the situation that a recipient might have to be updated to understand a newer SenML pack. But I'm wondering if there is anything we simply can point to and say error handling happens like this, or whether we have to invent something to discuss this. Okay, Ari?
So I think like that one challenge here that SenML can be used with a variety of different transfer protocols. Could be HTTP, could be COA, could be MQTT, could be a file. So we don't have, of course, we cannot say this is the error code to use. And maybe this document would not be the right place to go on this level. But what I'm thinking, there might be use for another document that gives in general the explanation on this kind of errors, this appropriate error code for CoAP or HTTP. And now I'm thinking
we have
sorry.
unprocessable entity in CoAP. So we have all these error handling mechanisms. It's not something SenML specific.
True. I was wondering if this is the right document or if there would be a different document, I mean, overall covering all sorts of current and future SenML extensions and giving the guidance there, which might be more, where you could actually then go in more details around this, that might be possible way forward. But yeah, no strong opinion here.
Yeah, so to me, this is a reasonable question to raise in a review. So what's the plan here? And maybe just adding a sentence or two that nothing in this document changes the overall error handling model in SenML might be a good thing. But I don't think we have any idea about specific error handling. I mean, we are not telling an implementer of units that they have to pull down the registry every time they encounter unsupported unit or something like that. It's just something that is kind of implied. You update your software occasionally, and then you can start doing new stuff. And this would be very similar. Okay, with that, yeah, there are some not so actionable comments from Krista. I think the actionable ones I already implemented. The use of the term content format with a dash and without a dash. So if anybody cares about details of saying things the right way, maybe they can tell me how to handle this. Yeah. One observation was that we are not using ABNF and SenML to describe the structure of field values, and this is the first time we do that. Why is that so? Well, because there is no document that does this, and we tried to set up one such document, and we know that this became complicated. Yeah, again, I don't think we really have to add anything here. So this will look a little bit like we are ignoring Krista, but it's not like we're ignoring him, but these are all good points, but they don't really lead to actions. So finally, as I said, I'm not going to bother you with the editorial stuff. There will be some more editorial stuff in the repository, and I plan to have another interaction with Ben Kadak because his discuss probably is the most complicated one. And if that goes well, I plan to submit a new version soon. I'm done.
Thank you, Carsten. Any more input or questions on SenML? Anyone? Okay. If so, the next item in the agenda is Coral. So that's for Christian mostly to lead. And I believe your main reference point is the pull request about the information model. And if you need to, I can share it.
Yeah, I'd kind of say a few lines on about where we are, and then I'll start screen sharing because I think this will help a bit more.
Sure.
So in general, in the design team meetings for Coral, we set out to focus on a few kind of focus points, because otherwise there's too many variables to keep in mind at the same time. And one we identified was identifying an information model, because once we have that, we can not only look into we can start looking into how would different applications look like if we used that model. And there's another topic is the CRIs that we are trying to get finished, but they are right by now a bit separate from Coral itself. And all the topics of how we serialize this in CBOR, we keep that aside for the moment. We've discussed that we want to use CBOR packed format for compression, but other than that, we are not trying to do this all at the same time. There is the pull request that Marco mentioned on how the information model would look like in the next iteration. And I tried to show this with a few lines that I sketched together in the last few minutes before this meeting started. So the overall the information model is, as described now in the pull request, split onto two levels. There's the general information model that is roughly equivalent to RDF. So this is nodes representing URIs and edges representing statements that are made about the thing on the start of the statement and thing at the end of the statement. Pretty much like web links, but with the difference that statements are not really depending on each other. That is, if you have a statement that is slot 1 can receive an order by doing this thing, then this is true independent of whether you come to slot 1 from this coffee machines has a coffee slot or from some other interaction. Now, for other interactions, that thing might not be that useful, but it's still true. So the model is described as having statements with subjects, with predicates or objects, or in link terminology, that would be a context and link target and a relation. They are largely exchangeable as far as terminology goes, and there can be literals. One thing that we are not fully sure yet how we'll handle it is how those literals will be disambiguated, because there are currently two design approaches that we could follow. One is to have, say, immutable atomic literals that just have a few properties that are probably serialized as child nodes, but we don't talk about how that happens in the information model. That's this approach here. Kind of everything is in the literal, and if two literals have the same complex value, that is, they have the same literal value and they have the same language tag and they have the same left to right indication and they have the same XSD type, yada yada, then they're the same. The alternative that is in the current text, but when the pull request is merged, there will probably be both in there, is to say that each time a particular literal occurs, this is a new object that is not necessarily identical to any other occurrence of Kaffeebecherhalterung, but it can be a subject of further statement. So there can be then a statement that says, this term that we're talking about here, this particular Kaffeebecherhalterung has the language German and has writing direction left to right, other properties, etc. I think this is mainly a matter of phrasing it, because for practical use, there will need to be restrictions in place anyway to avoid that there is too much fan out down below this. So you can still should talk about the German language from here, but things are getting pointless. So I think that this is mostly a matter of how to phrase things in such a way that they are easy to be understood, which is slightly pointing in this direction, with the caveat that people need to implement it efficiently just as well, pointing slightly to this direction. So if there are any strong opinions, I'm happy to hear those. If there are not so strong opinions, just experience, anything else too, but either of those it will probably be. One more thing I'd like to point out before we go to the structured information model is that there are still forms in there, but as far as the information model is concerned, they are just statements. So there can be a few optimizations in how they are serialized. There can be guidance on how they are used, but for the information model, it's just this slot has a thing like the literals above. That's a thing that is only this particular thing. It doesn't necessarily need to have an URI on its own, but it has a submit URI. You can submit there using that method post with this particular content format, and these and those are the fields you need to fill in. All that form stuff can still be expressed in this model. We just don't have to take extra care of it in the model because it's up to some point it's just statements. Questions or comments so far before I move on? Then I'll move on. A requirement that that is kind of forming to this whole endeavor is that things need to be consumable efficiently by constrained applications. And another constraint is that even different constrained applications should be able to consume this efficiently. These get into conflict to some extent because we might see because whenever we serialize things, we can put information into one place or into another place, but we can't put the information in two places at the same time without making processing complexity larger or the messages larger. Just to answer Michael's question, yes, if you state that you're a coffee slot and ask someone to make a coffee, then there will be coffee in your space. But I don't think that's really so surprising, because whenever someone receives information about a thing that they could interact with, they will follow that information, and there has to be a trust model whether they really should do it that way. But in the end, if the permissions check out, they will try to make coffee with you. So on the topic of structured information, there is, well, let me phrase it differently. Whenever we prepare this information for a particular application, we'll have to put it into a particular serialization. And to express what information can be put into that serialization, a new addition here is now the structured information model. This is basically a tour, and I still don't have a precise term that describes this well in graph theoretical terms, a tour through the nodes that are supposed to be expressed in a particular order. So you can say that this is kind of the first slot and this is the second slot. And it also contains information about where you go down next. So for example, with this, in this possible serialization, you go down you explain what an app slot is the first time you encounter it. So you say, here we have a coffee slot 1. You can do orders like that. And this is of type coffee slot, which we call Kaffeebecherhaltevorrichtung. And then there is this other coffee slot, which is of type app slot. And hopefully, by the way, you've now remembered it. And we call this particular slot that. But there can be different serializations. So you can express the same information the second time you pass over it, or you can express it both times. And different applications or different constrained applications might have requirements on how those are processed, where those are present. So for example, some application might not be able to use that information when it is just processing its data about this slot 1 thing. And by the way, I've put this label on the app slot resource type here, but what's to be expected is that the devices already know what this is, so that not all information that is theoretically available in all the CF triples needs to be expressed. I don't have a good term for this because everything I found on graph theory kind of rules out that these things are in any sense different, so hints appreciated. But this is the model that I would put in there to then guide the serialization and also to guide profiling. So if you have a particular application, then you might say that not only do you need to use these and those terms, you also need to serialize things, say, in your order of preference. So if you have the if you have the 2 slots and you want slot 1 to be used preferably, and you don't have an explicit indicator, just put it in the first space rather than going to slot 2 first and then to slot 1. I have a hunch that much of this can go away anyway if we have profiling nailed down precisely, but at least the part about the ordering will not. And so at least some of this should probably stay in there. And this summarizing is what I'd like to, or what we like to evaluate other models, say what ASDF needs, what we have in the existing applications, what web links would look like, what RDF would look like when using it with Coral. Serialization path is quite possibly, but I would still need to define it. And if there is a good definition of serialization path, yeah, that could work. Although it's putting the focus on, yeah, maybe it's a good thing to put the serialization more in the focus of the structured information model, because it is there for the serialization. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christian. You've basically captured also the PR with this. I suppose that's just the more.
Yeah, so when I started sharing the screen, this was all about this PR.
Okay. I think you had in mind also a separate PR to prepare anytime soon about an actual example, probably building on this.
Yes.
Okay. And I think there was also some more planned more about the diagnostic notation, but that's the yet other point also.
Yeah, the diagnostic notation is something that I should have mentioned before on kind of the different fronts that we're exploring. This, together with using PACT-CBOR, the extensions to diagnostic notation that Carsten presented last time in CBOR, are what we would use for the time being and probably going forward. But this should be in the next examples that we produce.
Right, so that should be material for the design team meeting later this week. So there should probably be updates about that at the next round here, hopefully. Okay, any more input or questions for Christian? Okay, so we can move on to the next topic then. And that should be Bill.
Hello. Am
Hi.
I coming through loud and clear?
Yes.
Excellent.
So you can share the PDF by yourself. It's available in the material here in Miteco.
Yes, let's see. I'm not entirely certain if I was able to.
So second
do that.
icon on the left,
I'm sorry.
on the top left, second icon from the left.
Asked to share slides.
Exactly.
Yes, excellent. Okay, got that. And
There you go.
okay, let me quickly see. Good. Okay, nice. All right. Yeah. Hello. So this is a quick update about the one draft, not dynamic link and conditional attributes, but just the conditional attributes draft. In the progress so far. So I have just a few questions to the working group, and then we can close this presentation. So latest development, we have been active in spurts, in bursts, and so we have now managed to at least clarify quite a few things. But still, there is always scope for new feedback and review comments. So please go ahead and do that. And in our GitHub pages, we have 3 issues remaining, 2 technical ones and 1 editorial, and they're all under active discussion. So I think that it's more important to discuss the technical issues. The editorial issues can be done quite easily, but we just wanted to discuss a couple of things. So firstly, this is a technical issue, which came up when we were discussing the band attribute. Now, just a background, band modifies the behavior of GT, which is greater than, or LT, which is less than, which indicate the limits where the notifications should arrive. So LT and GT, they indicate the limits where the value of the resource should cross before triggering a notification. And this is a notification 1 and only 1 notification. Right. So and the behavior you can see below in the slide. So for example, if the server has a resource and the state changes between the state changes from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And this is the base state. And the client sends a conditional observe with GT equals 6 as the parameter. So it's a query parameter. So the moment the resource value switches from 4 to 10, then you get a notification, and then in subsequent increases to 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on, you don't get anything. All right. So this is a background. Less than works in a similar way. Now, what happens when band is enabled? Now, if you want to have a band in which you want to get notifications for a specific group of resource states, you can set a band, for example, like this. So if it is greater than 2 and less than 12, and your band is enabled, so then if you actually get, if you put the query in, then you get notifications within the band. So you get notifications for 3, 4, and 10, and 11. But of course, if it is 2 and 12, then you don't get notifications. And that proceeds until it drops. And if it drops below this limit, you don't get notifications either. So then again, if the resource states start changing between this part, you get notifications again. And that's basically how band works. Now, the problem is this, that band is a Boolean. I mean, we have put in the draft that band is a Boolean, but is its value significant? So we have specified it that way, that band has really no significance in terms of the value. As long as the band parameter is there in the query, then it qualifies as a band command. So there have been comments on GitHub. So firstly, the first comment is whether the band attribute is defined as a Boolean type, but its usage is determined only by its presence and not its value. So we should probably explicitly explain that, which basically means that you accept both band equals 1 and band equals 0 as setting the notification band. The second comment here is whether we need the band attribute to have a value to begin with, because RFC 3986 does not really limit you to a state where query parameters need to have values. So instead of a name value pair, you just do it like this. So Christian has asked the question, just to understand the band example where it's not receiving an update. I'm sorry, Christian, I didn't exactly understand.
Better treated if after we've resolved the technical issue 1 on the value of band. So let's go ahead there, and if you have time, jump back to this.
Okay, all right. Okay. So so the example here is simply to omit the value and just have a query parameter like this, band and greater than and less than. That basically means that, okay, now you've done this as a band. The alternative here is not having band at all. And then in other words, you just allow GT and LT to trigger all notifications. So in other words, we modify the text in such a way, or the behavior of GT and LT in such a way that each time the resource states change after crossing the threshold, you keep sending notifications instead of just one. Now, all of these have pros and cons. For example, if you want to do it like this, in our draft, we have an example in the implementation considerations when you can actually have multiple bands. Now, this kind of forces the question, how do you set and unset the band notifications and have multiple bands? So do you have any opinions on this issue? So what should band do, and basically whether we should actually have values in the band?
Michael, I think enter the queue first.
Yeah, okay. I'm Michael Koster here of Passive Logic. The comment I had was that just depending on the behavior of query parameters may not be enough, because very often we need to encode this information in a different data model like ASDF or whatever. So for band, it would seem to make more sense to have the value be significant and to have it, be 1 or 0. I don't know if it's possible to have it sort of default to 0 if it's omitted, and then have the behavior be the same as if it's 0. I think that's what I've always assumed. Maybe there's a problem with that. But I'm just going to stick to the one comment, and if we get to the other subject, I'll join the queue again. But my comment was, yeah, that if there was some way to have it be able to be expressed as a Boolean in a different sort of model other than query parameter, that would be a big, that would be good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the way you are using band here, by using the presence as a Boolean value, that's all okay. So that's something that CoAP was designed to do. So I don't see a need to include superfluous value, and that's also always a source of interability problem. So presence absence sounds about right.
So Karsten, are you saying that we are going with the proposal in the GitHub comments too, with that example?
Yes, unless we decide to have band at all.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments?
Michael.
No, it said that, Karsten, that sounds right. I think that's what I was assuming always. So in an offline model, you would have a Boolean, and when you encode it as a query parameter, you would just use presence and absence. So that works fine. Okay. In terms of not having band at all or greater than less than, first, band was meant to change the behavior from threshold crossing to more of a, you notify when you're within the band and you don't notify when you're without the band. So you probably notify the first time you cross the threshold into the band, but the main point of the behavior was to control whether notifications were occurring or not during at certain signal conditions. So the idea of not having band at all and allowing GT and LT to trigger all notifications after the threshold is crossed sounds sort of like defaulting to a behavior that band is present or set. And probably we need both behaviors, both the threshold crossing. I want a limit that I just notify whenever it gets crossed, which is the original definition. And then the band definition, which is I want notifications when the value is between these limits. And so the crossing during band is not such an important behavior as the in within without sort of behavior. And then in terms of the setting and unsetting band, I don't know if we really had a way to do that, provide a way to turn it on and off and go from one behavior to the other. I don't recall that even being really part of the use case, that it seems like once I set up notifications, I'm going to either have it be one mode or the other, but not sure about going back and forth. And then with multiple bands, that's an interesting question. Theoretically, you could have multiple bands, but you would need labels other than GT and LT, I think. And maybe I was thought that there would be limit 1, limit 2, limit 3, limit 4, and you would have some behavior like that, but I'm not sure we did define it.
Yeah, this might be an artifact that was in the document before I arrived as the editor, but there is some implementation consideration which gives some reference to the origin server actually having two bands. And then Alan has been asking the question.
Two notifiers. Okay, so if you have a resource that has two notifiers and you have a band in one and a different band in the other, then they could each notify when their conditions are met. But I don't think that's exactly what we're describing, but that may be maybe what we were thinking also.
Yeah. So it was two notifies, but the way it was written was that there are multiple bands set. So it's kind of confusing how we can actually do that by not giving any further guidance on whether it's even possible to have multiple bands. Something that we really need to consider carefully before we include that text in the.
My recommendation would be not to include it unless someone comes up with a strong need to have it. It seems like that, as you say, that may be artifact.
Yeah. It's actually already in the GitHub issue. So please just have a look. It's probably the editorial GitHub issue actually. So that's it's there. Let's take that offline and decide whether we keep it inside or not. Christian, you're on the queue.
Yes. Could you go back one slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
So I think I can phrase this now more precisely than I did in chat before. What I'm seeing here, that the band does not trigger when there is a jump through the values, is a bit inconsistent with the explanation that we had, at least in a few discussions back. I've not been following too closely, of a view of that resource. So if we have this band, so this band attribute with a greater than and less than, looks to me like this is a view of the resource that says take the value whatever it currently is and clip it low and high to say 2 and 12. So whenever you receive whenever it goes higher, don't tell me because I don't care anyway, and whenever it goes lower, don't either. But ignoring this jump in the middle here violates this model, because now kind of having or not having a value in between makes things look different. So what I would have expected here, leaving out any less than or less than equal thing, is that as soon as it goes to the lower threshold, it would at least report either the lower threshold or the lower threshold 2 or the value 1, but at least tell me, because what I would implement with this is, say, some kind of regulation. So if the temperature is below 10 degrees Celsius, then I would turn the heating all the way up, and if it's above, say, 23, then I turn it all off, and in between I do linear regulation. And if it doesn't produce a value when I get a sharp crossing, then this would upset a lot of things. So I'm wondering whether this is kind of an integral part of band or just an artifact of how it's currently being described.
It's so band is used in two ways. It's used for what we call in-band notifications, which is this basic behavior. And you can swap the values around. So you can also have band signaling out of band behavior.
Yeah.
So that's basically when less than, for example, less than 2 and greater than 12. So that's the way it has been specified now. I don't have an opinion on whether we should actually start to give notifications when the threshold is crossed the other way. When it switches, from example, from 14 to 1. I do believe there's a use case for this. Whether it's interesting for the client to actually know that the threshold has been crossed the other way, I can't really say.
So at least for regulation, it would definitely be important. In an outbound situation, of course, it's kind of, it's in between, I don't care. But if it's this way around, that you get notifications for high and that you get notified when it's in there, I think most applications will want to know.
Okay.
It's not like they can't kind of, as long as you're in there, the server may send notifications. So you send a notification that something is crossing through, and the client can still ignore that notification, but not getting it is harder to ignore.
Michael?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, and that even if we wanted to say we're using band to define high and low error limits, and I'm getting notifications when I'm high and when I'm low, if I stop getting notifications, I don't know if that's because of some setting of PMIN, PMAX, or that, or whether I've returned to the normal band or not. So we probably do want to get a notification when we cross back into the normal band, or when we go back into that band. So it's more like, you could think of it as limit crossing, as in the other mode, and you can also think of it as state change when you're going from an out of band to in band, or in band to out of band. And I need to look at the equations again to see if that happens. I suspect that maybe it doesn't, and we need to think about that.
Okay, what I can do is I can capture this as another issue, and then we can keep it in the discussion in GitHub also.
Thanks.
One of the principles is that extra notifications, if you get extra notifications, that's not necessarily an error. You're just getting a little more data than you expected. So I think that just putting that mode in, if it doesn't exist, doesn't really have a negative side effect, I believe.
Yeah. I agree with that. Okay, I'll continue on with the next slides. So this is the second issue, and it's about an ongoing discussion we've always had about the presence of proxies and middle boxes that could be in the path between the client and the server. And in the discussions that we've had, if you look at the lower part of the slide, it kind of captures what is the problem. And this doesn't happen to every conditional attribute. It happens, for example, with PMAX. Now, what's happening is that the client expects from the server to send notification every 2 seconds by setting PMAX equals 2. Now, if there's a proxy in between the client and the server, then no matter the server fulfilling the condition of the query parameter, the proxy may choose not to return the value of the resource to the client if the value does not change. so we have been trying to figure out ways in which we can handle that, and I think from the perspective of conditional attributes, it's possibly kind of ambitious to try to find a workaround behavior. But I think what we can do is that we have agreed that we'll put some text in the implementation consideration. So I kind of propose a text to say that this specification defines conditional attributes that can be used with core observe. It's recognized that the presence of one or more proxies between the client and the server can interfere with clients receiving resource updates. And therefore, the server may use, for example, the max age option to mitigate this by setting max age to be less than or equal to pmax. Is this okay with everybody? Michael?
Is that another way to think about this is that PMAX is only guaranteed to work on a sort of a link basis, not so much link in terms of a 802.15.4 mesh, but link in terms of endpoints of the protocol. So if you wanted the behavior end to end, you would have to implement PMAX in the proxies, I guess. It's a side effect of that. But I think it's probably worth pointing out that PMAX is a link local kind of, not, it would be bad to use that. It would be confusing to call it that, but between protocol endpoints only and not through proxies. So, you know, that was part of that discussion to identify that.
Yeah, exactly. We had the discussion whether it's hop by hop or end to end. So yeah, it was. I just tried to avoid using the word hop by hop. So that's one reason.
Just relaying a comment from the chat from Christian that the text looks good. Maybe a should would be better considered.
Really, should a better option? I'm not completely sold on that. I do think that the server or the implementer should be given the option of either using a may.
Thing is, with a should makes it clear that if someone is using it through a proxy and the server is not setting the and things and the PMAX gets ignored, it kind of makes it sure where the blame lies. That is that the server would need to do something about it because the proxy is in no situation to know that there's anything going on. So the should would indicate that kind of you can choose not to, but if you choose not to, then beware that you will be blamed if things go awry.
Okay.
Is the implementation of PMAX required?
No, I don't think so. I don't really believe any of the.
In that case, the server can already ignore PMAX, and the partial implementation of PMAX that works directly but not through proxies is not much worse.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so I'll move to the next slide. And that's basically just a thank you slide. So we're done with this.
So the text in the previous slide can be the basis for a PR, I guess, focused on this, right?
The text is already captured in an issue.
Yeah. So a PR can follow, I suppose.
I suppose, yes.
Tweaking it with the latest input from Christian and Karsten.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And just checking, is there any possible updates already on DialLink 2? Since we are more or less on topic.
That's mostly my fault. I have been a little bit too busy right now to look at DialLink, but
no worries.
But that will follow. I want to get this version out, submitted, and then we can work on DialLink.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Then we have the last point in the agenda, the possible update for the charter. And there were no changes to the first version of the new text we proposed 2 weeks ago. So you can still find the same in the HackMD or CodeMD, where it is shared, and on GitHub with a diff. You can find all the links in the minutes of this meeting too. And the only official feedback I could track in the last few weeks was a mail to the mailing list from ESCO, basically happy enough with the current text as a good updated overview of the activities of the working group, just pointing out that if the text becomes too detailed, there's of course a risk to increase the chance to update the text again in the future. So of course, it's something to keep in mind. I'm not aware of any other feedback than that, so we need more time to collect more, and I hope more will come. And Karsten.
Yeah, I think that's actually a danger. This is now 40 paragraphs or something like that. This looks like a really humongous work program to be shouldered by about 10 active people. I mean, that's a real problem, but also it's a problem of perception. So we have been quite productive in this working group, but we have been doing this at a pretty glacial scale.
So do you suggest to also try to compress merge paragraphs to start giving a better impression on the surface already?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there are some things where the charter text actually does more in the way of constraining the working group than is actually needed. Of course, the working group would like to have a charter that says the working group does work, and the ISG would like to have a charter that very precisely says what the working group does and what it doesn't. So we cannot expect to cut this down too much, but maybe we shouldn't by ourselves add text here that constrains the working group, but mostly do this based on input from the ISG, or where we have good reason to believe there will be input by the ISG.
Right. Thanks for bringing this up. And I know you wanted to do a comparison of all the new text. So we're looking forward to it. And in general, we solicit more comment and feedback on the list or directly in the CodeMD. I think Francesca also wanted to check with other ADs for possible suggestions on how to proceed in general even. Anything from that side already?
So I brought it up very generally to see what the reaction was to updating the charter. There was not much reaction. This is, as I said last time, this would be a work to simplify core getting the work done and not getting stuck in ISG evaluation over and over again for the same reason, which is this really in charter? Every document coming, is this really in charter? And having that discussion all over again. But of course, we don't want to update the charter if that doesn't help getting things done and makes things harder instead of simpler. Yeah, I brought this up in the ISG as the working group is possibly considering rechartering, and there was some comments about I don't know if Stuart is here. Stuart Chershire, and talking about co-op. I don't remember now. I wrote this down somewhere, but let me see. Yeah, to conference, and we might want to reach out to him to get more like some additional things about co-op in the core charter, and I haven't done that yet. But yeah, I don't have a clear vision of what the ISG reaction would be to an updated charter. After all, if the working group believes that this should be done, then it's going to be a lot of wordsmithing and making sure that it's precise enough. But we do have like charters that are quite general. So, Karsten, did you want to?
Yeah, maybe one way to compress the charter a little bit is to reduce the verbiage about things we already have done, and try to factor this out into we will do maintenance on eggs instead of defining what exactly that maintenance will be. Now, of course, if there is somebody like Stuart who wants to have the word DNSSD in the charter, that may not work for that part, but maybe we should do a critical read where maybe the work that we already have done is the best description of the kind of work we were doing. Its maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I was also looking, for example, at the HTTP-based charter, and I know that's different monster, let's call it, but they have very specific items like HTTP revision, with very clear, we will do incorporate erratas, etc., HTTP and quick. And then they have other HTTP related work, which is quite general, and it's about, these are the characteristics of the items that we will take on, as we might take on as a working group, and given that there is consensus. And we have kind of the same general formulation in CBOR, where we're saying we do tags and CBOR related things as long as the working group agrees that this should be done.
Yeah, I forget one thing. So the HTTP BIS working group essentially largely works from the fact that people trust Mark. I mean, the charter could say this working group does what Mark thinks is the right thing to do, and it would probably still pass the ISG. But this is actually missing one other point of a charter, which is that it can be used by the working group chairs to beat up the working group members when they try to do something weird that is outside the scope of the working group. So that is actually a function that is needed, and that's the reason why even working groups that are based on the general principle that we trust Mark need some additional charter text. So Mark can then go ahead and point to the charter and say, oh, by the way, we are supposed to do this and not that.
Yeah. So of course, there needs to be consensus on the rechartering text and the fact that we even need rechartering. And thank you, Marco, and whoever else. I don't know if Jaime worked on this, but thank you for starting this work. I think if we can get it done and get consensus, and it will be helpful. But if we don't, then we should not try to we should do what's best. So
Sure,
any more
agree.
comments that might come, like Karsten, on the diff or anything else, I will continue to also explore on my side to see what's best, and we might take it on the IETF meeting.
Yeah, the only other thing that I noticed when skimming it, this talks about alternative transports, in particular non-IP based, which I think is audacious. Let's see whether we get away with that. But it also reminds us that we still don't have a good way to write a URI for some CoAP server that provides alternative transports. And I think that would be one thing, need not be in the charter, but that should be deeply seated in our minds when we discuss these things.
Actually, the alternative transport text, I think it was already in the previous charter. I don't know if you just mentioned that, or you said that the new charter has that.
Yes, but it now says things like and Bluetooth, which is completely changing the way in which I read the same words.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah, so yeah, I think one has to be really careful. I completely agree that we need to do something about CoAP over Bluetooth, but yeah, the way we phrase this here, I think, is really important. And I think we have a much better understanding how to handle the security issues than we had 10 years ago. So I think we are working with the security area on addressing the security gap, and not just with respect to alternative transports. But what I really want to point out is the URI thing, where we haven't really made any progress for like 5 years.
Christian?
I think that the proxying approach is progress on the URI front, because with that we can even use the existing schemes and don't have to come up with another one. But that's probably a larger discussion than the charter. So let's keep it at that.
Yeah, I think these are the kind of input we need anyway, and points to discuss. So I encourage you to post also on the mailing list about these points. At least they're also trackable.
Yeah, I'd rather hide the discussion in plain sight. So even though this is a minuted and recorded meeting, I think we can talk more freely here than we can talk on the mailing list. Yeah. So I just wanted to put a +1 to Christian's comment about using the proxy paradigm for URI management. That I think is promising.
Yeah, and overall this started from we should try to compress the text to give an overall better impression, and to try to make it well balanced between being not too constrained in scope, but still convincing enough for the ISG. And a practical way can be compressing the text on the work already done, actually. So I think we need some more round of input before starting to possibly change the first new version we have. But these inputs are already very useful. So feel free to provide them the way you prefer on the channels we have for this. We'll come back to that, of course. Okay. If there's nothing more on this, we are on the any other business. Do we have any other points to discuss for today? If no, thanks a lot for your time and contribution, and talk to you latest in 2 weeks.
I have one more question. Is the focus of the next meeting going to be a grab bag like this one, or do we have anything specific we want to achieve before the next meeting?
On the charter, you mean?
No, the next meeting in 2 weeks.
Mm,
Is there a main subject there, or is it just go
For
through
now,
ongoing work like we did
for
today?
now, I would expect ongoing work out of my
Okay.
head, but let's see what happens during the 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else for today? Bill?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for arranging this meeting. It has been useful.
Okay, then we can adjourn the meeting. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.